Well, good morning, YouTube, and welcome to Dark Sedona. My name is Ed Parker, and this is my channel. And I put this little video together today to add some background information and insight to this phenomenon we're all very concerned about called Jade Helm 2015. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, smoke them if you got them. I got a lot to say, and I'm going to try and say it in a very short amount of time. Don't want to waste your time, don't want to waste mine, and the hour is very late, so thanks for tuning in. Before I get started, let me say that I'm not a soldier, I'm not a law enforcement officer, I'm not a special ops guy, I'm not a Navy SEAL. I don't have any fantastic experience in politics or the military to impress you with. I'm just an average guy going through the same thing that most Americans are going through and have been for some time. My one claim to fame is that I may be the first person in the world to have put the famous quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn onto the internet. I did that in 1995, January of 1995, and I had never seen it out there before, but now it seems to be a staple of the patriot community. That's because whether you've read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, Volumes 1, 2, and 3, like I have, or not, you have gotten the essence of his message in one simple paragraph that showed up on page 13 of Volume 1. And how we burned in the camps later, thinking, what would things have been like if every security operative, when he went out at night to make an arrest, had been uncertain whether he would return alive and had to say goodbye to his family? Or if during periods of mass arrests, as for example in Leningrad, when they arrested a quarter of the entire city, people had not simply sat there in their lairs, paling with terror at every bang of the downstairs door and at every step on the staircase, but had understood that they had nothing left to lose, and had boldly set up in the downstairs hall an ambush of half a dozen people with axes, hammers, pokers, or whatever else was at hand. After all, you knew ahead of time that those blue caps were out at night for no good purpose, and you could be sure ahead of time that you'd be cracking the skull of a cutthroat. Or what about the Black Maria sitting out there on the street with one lonely chauffeur? What if it had been driven off, or its tires spiked? The organs would very quickly have suffered a shortage of officers in transport, and notwithstanding all of Stalin's thirst, the cursed machine would have ground to a halt. If. We didn't love freedom enough, and even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. In 1992, William F. Jasper published a book through Western Islands Press called Global Tyranny Step by Step, in which he tried to explain to an America giddy with the financial prosperity of the 1990s that there was a sinister plan to destroy this nation well underway. Jasper begins his book with a startling revelation in the introduction that has either been forgotten by most Americans or never learned by the rest of them still living. On pages 13 and 14 of the introduction, he says, "To understand unfolding world events, keep in mind the two principles underlying all of our federal government's foreign and domestic policies, convergence and interdependence. The plan to bring about a convergence or merger of the United States and the USSR is not a recent policy response to the supposed reforms of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. It first came to light in 1953, when public concern over large tax-exempt foundation grants to communists and communist causes prompted Congress to investigate. Of particular concern were the funding activities of the Carnegie, Ford, and Rockefeller foundations. Perhaps the most startling revelation of that investigation came when Ford Foundation President H. Rowan Gaither admitted to Norman Dodd, staff director of the Congressional Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations, Of course, you know that we at the executive level here were, at one time or another, active in either the OSS, the State Department, or the European Economic Administration. During those times, and without exception, we operated under the directives of the White House. We are continuing to be guided by just such directives. The substance of these directives was to the effect that we should make every effort to so alter life in the United States as to make possible a comfortable merger with the Soviet Union. At that time, even though the activities of the Foundation coincided exactly with Gaither's startling admission, it was simply too fantastic for many Americans to believe. It still is. Asked to assess such information, most Americans ask, why would some of our nation's wealthiest and most powerful capitalists use their great fortunes to promote such a goal? The compelling question has stymied many good Americans for decades. But of one thing there can be little doubt. Our nation is plunging headlong toward convergence and the eventual merger referred to by Rowan Gaither many years ago. Anatoly Golitsyn was a high-ranking Soviet defector and author of two books. The first one was called New Lies for Old, and this one, The Perestroika Deception. Writing in 1989, he tried to warn us about convergence and restructuring. From page 34. Conservatives are confused about Gorbachev and Perestroika. The old assumptions have been upset. They are out of ideas. They have lost perspective. The Soviet strategists, however, are concerned that the conservative crisis and confusion are temporary affairs. They believe that conservatives may recover and resist restructuring. For this reason, strategic objectives of Soviet political warfare include, first of all, the neutralization of anti-communist influence, especially the conservative parties, as an important factor in the political life of the United States, West Germany, France, and Britain. Secondly, securing the victory of the radical left in the next presidential elections in 1992 in the United States, and the victory of the Socialist and Labor parties in the national elections in West Germany, France, and Britain in the 1990s. In their assessment, the left will be prepared to carry out and accelerate restructuring in the United States. The Soviet strategists believed that an economic depression in the United States would provide even more favorable conditions for the execution of their strategy. In that event, the Soviets and their allies would shift to the doctrine of class struggle and try to divide Western nations along crude class lines. The final period of restructuring in the United States and Western Europe would be accompanied not only by the physical extermination of active anti-communists, but also by the extermination of the political, military, financial, and religious elites. Blood would be spilled, and political re-education camps would be introduced. The communists would not hesitate to repeat the mass repressions of their revolution in 1917, of the Soviet occupation of Eastern Europe in the Second World War, or of the Chinese Communist victory of 1949. This time they would resort to mass repressions in order to prevent any possibility of revolt by the defeated to make their victory final. On page 46, Golitsyn elaborates. Arbatov was lying when he said that the USSR had ceased to be an enemy of the United States. The USSR is becoming more formidable, more sophisticated, and more dangerous because the new design for communist world victory is more realistic than the old. The new design can be described most succinctly as cooperation blackmail. Convergence will be accompanied by bloodbaths and political re-education camps in Western Europe and the United States. The Soviet strategists are counting on an economic depression in the United States and intend to introduce their reform model of socialism with a human face as an alternative to the American system during the Depression. All these points must be publicly revealed. The New World Order has been imposed upon Americans by those most trusted to preserve our nation. Throughout the 20th century, capitalists, Republicans, and communist Democrats bureaucrats have pretended to govern, while silently putting in place all the means of our destruction. To blame a single president or administration for this crisis is naive. What you are seeing today is the culmination of a plan that dates back to 1776 and is intended to establish world government and the throne of the Antichrist. Before it can succeed, both the USA and Israel must be destroyed. Maybe Obama's actions and the actions of the Clintons and the Bushes for the last couple decades will make more sense in that light.
This is my last election.
Yeah,
After my election, I have more flexibility.
yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and understand what